The woman in your life will do what she must do to comfort you and calm you down and let you rest now. The woman in your life, she can rest so easily. She knows everything you do because the woman in your life is you.
Hello everybody and welcome to Women's Spaces. My name is Elaine B. Holtz and I'm your host. And as always, I am thrilled about today's show. I have two special guests with me by the name of Kenna Lee and Elaine Booth. And they are two women who had the fun and the honor and the chutzpah to join 400,000 people in New York on September 21st, 2013, which was coined the People's Climate March. And it was very, very interesting. One of the main motivators for me doing this show is I was a little bit disappointed on the media that they did not cover as much as they should have. In fact, I surveyed something like 40 people, and out of the 40 people that I surveyed, only 2 of them actually knew that the march had been going on. I mean, that shows the power of the media. 400,000 people show up, and most of the people in Sonoma County don't even know about it. So I hope through this show that we will get more information and we will have a better understanding of why the people marched, how important it is to pay attention to climate change. But before we start, I don't know how to call this, but people have been calling it an angelversary, A-N-G-E-L, but I call it an anniversary. And it's the year anniversary of the death of Andy Lopez Cruz, who was a 13-year-old boy here in Sonoma County. And I have been very, very involved with the Andy Lopez case. It's been heartbreaking to me. You know, when you start thinking about it, what happened, the fact that 7 bullets were put in this young boy's body, and the district attorney here in Sonoma County said that it was deemed legal. Let's put it that way, legal. It's amazing what things are legal. The fact that the policeman, the sheriff who shot him, Sheriff Eric Gelhaus, thought his life was threatened. Andy was carrying a AK-47 children's gun. That's the way I coin it, because I just can't believe it. I can't believe that they could not tell the difference between a real gun and an AK-47. Myself, personally, I was involved with Guns in the Park, and I saw young kids picking up AK-47s, but in order for them to pick it up, the police officer actually had to put it in their hands. So it's just still mystifying to me how this officer could mistake the gun for a toy gun. I mean, it's just, you know, it's just mystifying to me. I can't even talk about it. And I've been involved for over a year. We do have the task force that's still in session, and one of the things that's going to be happening is keep your fingers crossed that we're going to have an oversight board here in Sonoma County. I'm very excited about that. And also the Board of Supervisors has been having several meetings and allowing people to speak, and I want to do a shout out. You know, I know they have that 3-minute limit, and Supervisor David Rabbit has been very generous with the time, and I personally want to thank him and all the Board of Supervisors for taking the time to listen to us and for forming the task force. Let's just hope that something comes of it, because if it doesn't, we're just going to be in the same place that we were before the shooting, and if we don't change things, I guarantee you it will happen again. So here we go. Let me just flash Andy Lopez Cruz's picture. I'm very sad, Andy. I know you and your friends, and I want to honor your mother on this anniversary, and I hope through your death that something good comes in our community. Well, that's a lot to chew on, folks. I understand, and I understand how the community is still mourning. We had a wonderful memorial. Many, many people came out, and I want to thank everybody for showing up. And also, there was a cleanup last Wednesday, and also I want to thank all the people for showing up and doing that. People are caring, and it's not going to go away. We are not going to go away until we have some justice for this horrible thing, because I myself personally do not want to see it happen again. Anyway, without further ado, I would like to introduce my guest, Kenna Lee and Elaine Booth. Welcome to Women's Spaces.
Thank you for having us.
Well, let me give our listeners and viewers just a little background on this. 400 people, 400,000, I mean, 400,000 is a lot of people, marched on September 21st, 2014 in what was called the People's Climate March, demanding that our government do something. And what I found so interesting is more than 1,100 organizations endorsed the march, organized by a coalition of groups, including, of course, your group, which is 350.org, Aberez, the Sierra Club, Climate Justice Alliance, and the Service Employees International Union. And the UN says that there were 125 nations that were represented. It's the first time in 5 years that world leaders have gathered to discuss climate change. So welcome, ladies. You know, before we start, what I'd like you to do is give us a little background. Why don't we start with you, Kenna? I know you're very familiar with 350.org. Why don't you tell us a little bit about 350.org and what motivated you to go to New York and participate in the march?
Well, one of the things I like to try to explain when I explain 350.org is where the name came from. And 350.org was chosen as the name for this climate advocacy organization, and because James Hansen, who was a NASA scientist, first in the 1980s announced to Congress that 350 parts per million was the maximum amount of carbon we could have in our atmosphere and still maintain human civilization, pretty much. So 350 parts per million is the goal, and that goal is generally believed by scientists to be consistent with the Kyoto protocols and everything that has come out of international agreements that have said, you know, anything more than a 2 degrees Celsius rise in Earth's temperatures will cause a catastrophe that we don't want to see. So in order to keep it at or below a 2 degree rise, we have to get back down to that 350 parts per million of carbon in the atmosphere. Right now we're well above it, but there are many projected models that could bring us back down to it. We still believe it's an achievable goal, and it's a very concrete goal. So that's where we get to, is this concrete goal of 350 parts per million, 350.org. And 350.org started several years ago really as a very small group of climate activists who decided to do an international day of action. And they were such a small group that they had one for each continent to make this international day of action happen. So these kids, they were college students, and their professor, Bill McKibben, got on the phone and just started calling climate activists and environmental groups all around the world and created this international day of coming together and saying we're all in this together. And that's what 350 has done a really good job of, is creating an umbrella in a sense that it's not white people in Sonoma County that are concerned about the environment. You know, even though sometimes in Sonoma County we feel like we live in this bubble of, oh, we're all here trying to save the earth. It's people of all races, all classes, all nationalities, many of whom are on the front lines of environmental change and climate change, and bringing all those groups together in one conversation and one statement to our political leaders and our world leaders of this has got to change. So that's where the 350.org organization comes from. Bill McKibben is the kind of leader of the organization. I don't think he would want himself described that way.
Wow.
But he's published lots of books, and he publishes regularly in Rolling Stone, and he's the voice that has brought a lot of people into the movement.
Well, you know, it's really interesting when you talk about it, and I think of 400,000 people. In fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to flash a picture on the screen here. I mean, this is what, folks, this is what 400,000 people marching in New York. I mean, it must have been so overwhelming when you start thinking about it. I mean, I look at that picture and I just think it's just absolutely amazing. I mean, and I understand, why don't you answer this, Elaine? I understand that one of the things that we're seeing in that picture is actually your group.
Yeah, so both Ken and I were participating under the banner of Sonoma Clean Power, which you can see on this shirt, and I forgot the question.
No, I said what one of your people were in the parade there.
Yes, Elaine was holding one of the banners that was visible in that
Can we go back?
picture. It says, "We can build the future."
Oh, okay. So let me just show that. So where the yellow is, if you look at the yellow right here, right? Is that you?
Yes, it's right there.
So right here in the yellow, right in this little area,
Yes,
that's actually where your group was.
right.
So tell me, what was that like for just being with all those people? My God.
It was wonderful. It was very exciting. It was a joyful march. There were, people had talked about tens of thousands of people attending, and instead we had, as you said, Elaine, hundreds of thousands of people. There were families, individuals, there were organizations big and small, all kinds of VIPs who wanted to make an appearance, and it was, a very life-giving, life-affirming march, and a very joyful, colorful march with music and that kind of thing.
Well, it's really interesting. I can't imagine what 400,000 people looks like. And I'm wondering, Kenna, maybe you could answer this one. I'm wondering, why do you think it's so important? First of all, why do you think so many people across the globe? I mean, they say there was something like 100 and some odd nations. Let me see what my notes say. 125 nations were represented. What do you think was the motivator for all these people to show up? I mean, I can't remember when we've had a march that big.
Well, we want to plan it, and you think about, for every person that was at that march, how many more people couldn't afford to go, couldn't get the time off work to go, couldn't travel the distance to go. So I feel like of those 400,000 people, each of us that was there was representing a whole crowd of other people who are heavily invested in this issue. So I think for this march, time to coincide with the UN Climate Summit was really important for us to make ourselves visible and say, we want change. Here came 125 nations together to talk about climate change at the UN, and right before they were going to have their talk, which was in preparation for Paris next year, where more treaties hopefully will be signed and made about what the world is going to do together, was to let those leaders know, and all the politicians in this country especially, and President Obama, know that the will of the people is for change to happen. That's one of the problems that has repeatedly been stated about, well, why doesn't more happen politically around climate change? And they say, well, the will of the people isn't there. There's no political will. So it's important for us to just keep showing up and saying, actually, the political will is here. And that was reflected in President Obama's statement to the UN in the week following the march, was, stated on the UN floor, the people are marching. We have to listen to them.
Well, it's interesting. Do you think they were listening? I mean, what is your take on it, Elaine? Do you think people were listening? Do you think there's any changes that you see happening since the march, or any buzz that you've heard?
I think many people were not listening, but I do think that there was also a large group of people who were aware that this very large march happened, and they were listening, and they were frustrated by the lack of coverage in local areas of the march. So I also think that government officials were listening, and many different organizations were listening, and businesses were listening to what happened at the march, the number of people that came, and the number of issues that were dealt with, and kind of the international flavor of it, and all the participants from all over the United States. So, as you said before, it was difficult because we did not make much headway with, the media, but the feeling at the march was one of great excitement and great interest, And the VIPs that were there were all upbeat, and the participation of the people at the march was very important, and the number of people at the march was very important. So I think that it enhances the chance of getting people to listen in the future.
Well, you know, it's really interesting. I have a sales background, and for every letter of complaint you get, one letter equals about 100 people. So if we're going to use that premise of one person, every person that marched equals 100 people, that's millions of people that are supporting this action. I mean, I think people are a lot more aware than we even give them credit for. Mm-hmm. You know, Elaine, one of the things you talked about something about build the future. Was that a theme, or was that something that happened there? Or can you go into that a little bit? Is that you said, what are some ways we can actually build the future, or some ideas that you have?
Yeah, you can see in the march picture that Sonoma Clean Power had a banner that said, "We can build the future." It's big orange with 4 yellow flags, and we marched under that banner, and one of the things that we're building the future with currently is Sonoma Clean Power. Sonoma Clean Power it came live in May of this year, and it provides clean, renewable energy from solar and wind and geothermal sources. They're local to Sonoma County, and people are excited and starting to use that energy. So that's one of the things. There are other ways that we're also building the future. There's an organization called Our Children's Trust, and they've been taking legal action, creative legal action, to protect the atmosphere by calling it a right, that the children have a right to a healthy atmosphere for the future. They're working with a base of lawyers in Oregon. They have had some cases thrown out, but they have captured a lot of interest, and one of the young students, an 18-year-old, he walked in the march that went all the way across the country. And so there are other creative things that are happening also. There's a group called Bold Nebraska, which really it totally delights me. It's a group that's composed of Nebraskans, and they call themselves the Cowboy and Indian Alliance. And they built a barn right in the path of Keystone XL, so the tar sands oil would have gone through that land in a pipe. But because they built the barn there, Keystone has to find another place to build its pipe. So every single time you can stall an action like this, you get a leg up on making sure that Keystone or other such things are not built.
It's amazing. Yeah. It's amazing, everything that you're saying. I've never heard of. I mean, that again is the media. I would like that, especially the children aspect. I mean, if you would get me a contact with a person, I would love to meet them. I mean, I think that's really, really important. Well, back to the talking about the march. Kenna, do you think that there was any kind of impact? I mean, what kind of impact do you think that march had, and what do you think people walked away with? What did you walk away with?
I love that you asked that question, especially in a show where you started with talking about Andy Lopez, because for me personally, walking away from the march on a kind of very micro level of myself and my children who were there, I felt like for my children, the most important moment was we were walking behind the "We Can Build the Future" banner, and the march was designed to follow a certain narrative. So We Can Build the Future was a group of people making change, and obviously children and young people and families. But we were white middle class people, and the section in front of us was people on the front lines, indigenous communities that are being impacted by the tar sands, people from countries where sea level rise is affecting us immediately. And so many of the people at the start of the march who are being impacted are people of color, and racial justice and economic justice were completely folded into the narrative of this march in a way that you don't often see in large environmental events, where that was brought forward at every step along the way in the planning process and in the execution of the march, was that economic justice, racial justice, environmental justice is essential to be built into what we're doing to try to prevent climate change. So when there we are walking behind this banner and my children want to walk faster, and I say to my 2 middle-class white teenage sons, that's not our place. You know, we're here to support them, but we have to let them have their place to speak first. I thought that's the learning for us in this one, was not it's all important to go have our voices heard, but sometimes our voices need to be supportive underneath the voices of people who have had a harder time historically and who have a harder time economically or due to cultural reasons getting their voices heard in the first place.
You know, that's an amazing thing for young people to learn. I mean, what a lesson bringing. I mean, we could do a whole show just talking about your children
but
being
for me, that was the impact of the march, was the way that it was created, the fact that labor was present in such a large scale. I mean, coming in these huge groups. Just when you said you can't imagine what 400,000 people looks like. Well, you can't see that many people. You can look down one way and down the other way, and there's people all the way you can see, but you can't see the whole thing. And just the huge numbers of labor groups and labor organizations and indigenous rights organizations and people of color, people who've been fighting for environmental justice, and the way their voices were brought forward and prioritized was such a huge part of, when you're saying the impacts, was folding those stories and those priorities into the ongoing movement. I think was as important as anything that, you know, could have been reported about how many people showed up.
Well, I know, it sounds like it was an amazing experience, you know. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to identify ourselves. For people who are just tuning in, you are listening to Women's Spaces. I am your host, Elaine B. Holtz. I'm talking with Kenna Lee and Elaine Booth, and we're talking about the People's Climate March that happened in New York on September 21st, 2014. And what I found so interesting about this is that 400,000 people marched. And it was just amazing. There were more than 1,100 organizations that endorsed the march, which is amazing to me, along with 125 nations participated. And I understand also, maybe one of you could answer this, that actually I don't know what they call him, the president or the leader of the United Nations marched. Do you want to address that? Did you have a chance to see him, or you just hear about it?
I did not see Ban Ki-moon, but he was addressing the summit on Tuesday, and there were many dignitaries and world leaders that attended this summit. And so, yeah.
What was the title of the summit? Do you remember?
The Climate Summit.
It's just called the Climate Summit.
Yeah, the Climate Summit.
So then nations come together and they're going to talk about different aspects?
Nations come together, but at this particular one, there were many nations that were absent. There were businesses and some smaller nations, and various things were decided, but the actual worth of what they decided is kind of in question. They decided to cut deforestation down to 50% over the next decade, and then over the following decade to eliminate deforestation altogether. They pledged other kinds of climate actions, but nobody really knows whether those actions, whether they're talking about using those for pledges they've already given, or whether these are new pledges that are going to influence the future and influence the amount of carbon in the atmosphere in the future. So it's kind of a question whether those were meaningful pledges. People are hopeful, but we really don't know.
Well, you know, it's interesting. I keep thinking about when we marched for the Iraq War, and George Bush called it a focus group. And there was millions across the globe. I mean, just like this, there was only 400,000, there were 400,000 in New York, but this was going on all over the globe. Mm-hmm. I mean, this was not just a march that was limited to New York. So millions of people were out. What, either one of you, if you want to give an opinion, why do you think that our government is dragging their feet on this? I don't understand. Was there any information given at the march? Or I know there were many, many workshops that happened afterwards. Anybody address why are they dragging their feet? I mean, they're human beings too. Would you agree? Either one of you, who would like to answer that?
You know, in my opinion, they're dragging their feet because their feet are bound to some degree. You know, we're controlled by large corporate money in this country, and you know, it's been my opinion for a long time that President Obama really would have preferred to, you know, shut down Keystone XL, but his hands are tied to some degree because basically large corporate interests have the power in this country. And I believe that the delaying tactics that politicians are making, some politicians, are for that reason. They really don't want to, you know, see climate change, the carbon in the atmosphere increase, but their hands are tied and they're just delaying. So maybe it's less a lack of interest than a feeling that they can't commit suicide politically, and they want to stick around and at least do what small things they can. I don't know if that's a cynical attitude, but that's how it seems to me.
Well, I'm watching a lot of things go on in our own county politically, and I see how they protect their positions. And I think the time has come where we have to quit doing that because of the fact we're in big trouble. We really are. We're in huge trouble. Well, you know, you talked a little bit about the summit. Now, the march was before the summit, yes, from what I understand. Was there any talk or many of the people who were going to be involved in the summit, were they also involved in the march itself that you even saw?
Mostly not, according to my understanding. It was, you know, the marchers were trying to communicate to the people coming to the summit. Well,
let's talk a little bit about one of the questions that you put that you wanted to address, Elaine, also, is that what would be the single? You know, I mean, it's hard to, I know there's so many things that have to be done. And one thing personally that bothers me is, you know, they say, you know, change your light bulb, you know, now we're preserving water, all the different things that people are doing as if that's a solution. I mean, it's part of the solution. I mean, we all have to take responsibility, but we still have governing bodies that are supposed to make decisions. So if either one of you, why don't we start with you, Kenna, like if you could just talk to somebody, like pretend that like maybe even President Obama came in here and he says, Kenna, what would you like to do? What would you share with him? And then you answer that question also, Elaine.
I'm not sure I understand the question exactly. Are you saying like what would we tell individual? Because what I would tell an individual to do is very different than what I would tell President Obama to do.
Well, let's start with the individual first.
So I have to say that I've spent a lot of time worrying about my consumer choices because that's you know, kind of how we're taught to think about ourselves in this culture is as consumers, and that's a very comfortable place for kind of corporate America to put the environmental movement is into people making consumer choices and changing our light bulbs. But the time for changing our light bulbs is really past. Yes, we should all change our light bulbs, but really we have to be looking at things on a systems level. And so I think the one thing would be to think of yourself as a citizen instead of a consumer, to make that paradigm shift to how do I take part in the political process of my country and move forward large-scale decision-making instead of what do I buy.
Very interesting. How about you, Elaine?
Well, I think that the most important thing we can do is to get money out of politics. I think we need a constitutional amendment that says that corporations are not people and that money is not speech. And then I think we can begin to really tackle the problems that are facing us, because I think that's the root problem. We barely have a democracy these days. You take the two Koch brothers and you turn them into one person, they have almost half the wealth in the world. And that needs to be changed. We can't be governed by money. We need to be governed by real, live human beings participating in a process to, let life as we know it continue on the earth.
So you're actually saying two things. The first thing you're saying is that the consumer has to start thinking themselves as a citizen, not just a consumer. I mean, it's so interesting. I even ask myself every day, I say, why do I have to listen to the stock market? Why do I need to know the stock market? I mean, I want to know what changes are made in the climate or what bills are passed that are affecting our health care, but I have to listen every day to the stock market. I don't know what that has to do with me at all. But then again, as a consumer, I think when I listen to the stock market, if it's low, you think you're going to lose your job. If it's high, you feel secure. That's the only answer that I could come up with. And then you're saying another thing is taking the money out of politics. So there's more clean decisions being made. And sometimes, when I watch these politicians, as angry as I get, sometimes I have compassion for them because I feel in a way they're trapped. They're trapped. They have so many people they have to satisfy. But at the same time, the reality is that we have to take care of this issue right now or we're not going to survive. Well, let's go back to the second part of it then. We've talked about the consumer and we've talked about the politician, but what would you tell President Obama if he came in and he said, well, Kenna, what should I do about climate change? What would you say to him?
Well, there's so many things that I would want him to do. But I think as a very first step, because it's something that he could go out and do tomorrow, is for him to take a moral stance on the Keystone Pipeline and to deny it on moral grounds. And that would turn the conversation, not just stop one pipeline, but keep turning the conversation, just like the divestment from oil movement is trying to turn the conversation towards what is ethical in this situation, not what is politically expedient and what is even possible. What is ethical? And start from there instead of what seems possible.
I'm just curious, what do you mean by moral? I mean, when you're looking at climate, I mean, that's a great way to put it, but just for our listeners and viewers, just to be a little more specific, what do you mean by moral? What's moral?
Well, one of the things that the climate movement is really trying to do right now is to frame the debate, not of, well, we can have continued growth and economic prosperity, or we can try to save the climate. Is to look at it differently and say, we can make ethical choices about continuing our species, our planet as we know it, and we can do this in a way that doesn't compromise, our economic future. But to frame the oil industry as a rogue industry, to say this industry is doing something that is morally wrong. It is killing people. It is killing our children. It is setting up a situation where people cannot live. They cannot live good lives. They cannot live lives at all. To make a kind of black and white statement about that and say, there's a point at which you're off the charts of what's acceptable to do. And to decide that at this point the oil industry has gotten there and that we can make a black and white statement about it and say it's not okay.
It's so interesting. I was just thinking, I recently got rid of my television. I have Roku, which is a kind of it's kind of an automatic thing. You get all kinds of documentaries and all kinds of wonderful things, and it brings me back to World War II. And I start thinking about World War II. And what happened in World War II is, and this is really insightful as to what you're talking about, we were not ready for war at all. And yet within 6 months, we had carriers built, we were ready to help England. I mean, we were ready. And so I think of the same thing with the climate. We could get ready very quickly.
Yes.
I mean, what I would like to tell President Obama personally is, let's get ready here. Let's start doing it. Let's stop talking about it. Let's start doing it. Let's start recognizing the immoral aspect of it is the fact that our children are dying. I mean, it's really very, very heartbreaking to me. My grandson's thinking about getting married and tells me he wants to have a child. And I say to myself, my God, first of all, the pregnancy alone with all the chemicals and all the stuff that's in the air and the climate change and all the things that are happening, it's very frightening. So I think it's very important that people look at it as a moral issue, not even a political issue, not even a monetary issue, but just a moral issue. Do we support life or do we support death? Wars bring death. Climate change is bringing death. It's bringing horrible situations to people.
Yes.
I mean, just the people evacuating. Well, Elaine, what would you tell him? I mean, I'm just curious. What would you like to say? I think
I think Kenna and you put it very well. It is a moral choice. You can't treat people as they're being treated. So I would do exactly as Kenna and you have just described.
Yeah, I love the idea of the more. Take it out of the monetary. Just look at the morality of it. It's the same thing with war. Just look at that this is an immoral act, especially, there's a thing like thou shalt not kill, but there's many ways we kill each other. Through the climate we're killing each other, through our food, through all kinds of different things. So it's just an amazing thing. Well, listen, we're coming to the end of the interview, and I want to let you know that I really appreciated this. This is a very important topic that we really have to cover. We have to cover it more and more and more. So the march ended, and I know they had workshops. What was your favorite workshop, either one of you, or did you attend any? Did you attend any of the workshops or any of the things that were going on there?
Well, I was there with my kids, and none of them were really age appropriate for my kids, so hopefully Elaine was able to.
Well, I attended Flood Wall Street, and that was also with 3,000 people very successful. They made a real point there about how corporate capitalism is killing us, and I tried to attend the lecture series that preceded the climate march on Saturday night, but the line extended around many corners, and I think they let in about a third of the people and had to cut out the rest. So, that's a good sign that people were there and they were interested in hearing the speakers, and many of us did not make it. So.
Well, you go to these things, there's so many things happening, it's really, really hard. Well, we're coming to the end of the show, and I just would like to know, is there anything specific that either one of you would like to share? Something that really impacted you? Was there a person that you met? Was it a conversation you got into? It's something that really impacted you and made it really valuable for you to be there.
I think it was for me, the atmosphere of hopefulness that was around the city. I was there for a week beforehand with my kids, and we toured the UN building, and just remembering that the history of the UN, even though it seems like this kind of formless bureaucracy that moves very slowly, that it was born out of World War II, out of this time when nations came together to say, we can do better as humanity. And that we have an organization that was born out of that is working towards finding climate solutions, as laborious and incremental as it might be. That gave me hope, and just riding the subways and seeing all the signs for the march and all the events that were going around, dances and people doing yoga in the park for the climate, and female rabbis blowing horns for the climate, and just everywhere you went there was these things going on for the climate. And the family that we were visiting brought in a tree that had a sign on it that said, "I'm 1 in a million." And there were trees, 1 million trees being planted in New York last month by just anybody that wanted a tree could go get a tree. And they planted 1 million trees to sequester carbon, So it was, the atmosphere of hope was very engaging and exciting to be with.
Well, just listening to you gives me some hope. And I just want to give you a little tidbit. That horn is called a shofar.
Thank you.
And what they do is they blow it during all the high holidays. And what it is to call in the Great Spirit, to call in God, to bless the people, and to acknowledge that we're here. I mean, it's a very important thing, so I think that's beautiful. And I love it, female rabbis. It's about time, right? It's female rabbis. That's wonderful. How about you, Elaine? What impacted you? What stands out when you hear Kenna talk? What is your fondest memory?
I have to say that it was the hope of seeing 400,000 people arrive when the media kept talking about tens of thousands. Seeing all those people and seeing them celebrate, and as Ken also said, seeing the march led by the people who are affected most. I mean, they are affected now. They're losing their islands and their livelihoods. So it was the essence of hope and the fact that this may make people pay attention more to climate change. Even though it didn't get reported in some newspapers and it should have been a bigger deal than it was, I still think that it is a catalyst for future change, and it will be easier to get things under control.
Well, it certainly was an inspiration to me when I heard, when they were reporting it on KPFA. And at first it was 100,000, then it was 250, then it was 350, then all of a sudden the big 400, and I thought, oh my God, and they kept describing it. The people kept coming in. I'm going to show the picture one more time. I mean, I'm just amazed. And folks, I brought the banner a little bit closer, but right there, those 4 yellow banners, that's actually Sonoma County right there. That all in the midst of all those people. So thank you so much, Sonoma County, and I know my dear friend Woody
Hastings.
What's Woody's last name?
Hastings.
Woody Hastings. Oh my goodness, Woody Hastings was there, and he actually was the contact person that made me in contact with both of you. And I really appreciate you coming into the studio and all the wonderful things that you had to say. And the way I like to end the program is with my guests is anything that's in your mind that you would like to express to our listeners and viewers. I think it's really important. One of the things that as human beings, as people living in our own county, we oftentimes don't talk to each other. And so what I like to do in the show is I like to give people a chance to just talk in the camera, to talk to the person who might be listening to you. Some ideas, maybe we can inspire 1 or 2 more people to stand up, or 1 or 2 people to look at Sonoma Clean Power just by some of the things you say. So just either one of you, would you like to say anything that's in your heart or anything special you would like to tell people?
Well, I think there's a lot of people who would like to do something and aren't sure what to do. And so I'd love to just plug
You can look at that camera.
Sonoma County's 350 organization. We're called 350 Sonoma County. We have a Facebook page. We have monthly meetings, and all are welcome to come and get involved with doing something, because action begets hope, begets action, begets hope, and that's how things change.
How about you, Elaine? Anything special?
I think it's the classic answer of caring and getting involved, even if you don't have a lot of time, but on some level, be involved, because, reducing the carbon in the atmosphere over the next 50 years is something we all need to pay attention to. So even if you're busy and, you're taking care of a job and children, pay attention and vote with the climate in mind.
Very important to vote.
Mm-hmm.
And we do have an election coming up, so it's very, very important. Well, Kenna Lee and Elaine Booth, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for being on Women's Spaces, and also really thank you for going and representing Sonoma County in the way that you did. There were so many wonderful people that left. I just think it was a wonderful, wonderful experience for both of you, and I want to thank you for being here and sharing it.
Thank you.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Anyway, to my viewers and listeners, wow, what a show when you start thinking about it. You know, you really start thinking about 400,000 people. I've got to flash that picture again. I mean, I'm just overwhelmed by it. I look at it and I say, wow. And there, if you look at it again, those yellow flags, that's our own Sonoma County just walking and making their statement. And you know, all of us need to make a statement. We all need to say enough is enough. I'm thinking about the things that are going on in our county. I mean, there's so many things about the environment. And oftentimes people think, oh, there's nothing I can do. There's nothing I can do. Well, I'm going to tell you two stories. The first story I'd like to tell you is, I remember when my mother came into my house in about the late 70s, and she says, what's all that garbage in your kitchen? I says, well, Mom, I'm starting to recycle. What do you mean recycle? Yeah, you know, you're going to have mice, you're going to have rats, you're going to have water, you know, all kinds of different things coming in with all that trash in the kitchen. I said, no, we're recycling. Well, let's go fast forward to 2014. Recycling right now is one of the biggest businesses and profit-sharing things that we have in our country. So a group of people had an idea. We're going to recycle. We're going to do things a little bit different. And before you know it, one by one, it starts to happen. So if you have an idea, don't be afraid to express it. Don't be afraid to share it, because you never know, that idea may be something that is very helpful. The second thing that's very interesting to me is this plastic bag ban. People worked on it for years. For years. Why did they want plastic bags banned, or plastic altogether? Because when we dump it in the ocean, it's killing our sea life. And we need fish to eat, believe it or not. And if they're going to kill off all the fish, where are we going to get the fish? So all of a sudden, people start pushing and pushing and pushing. And guess what? Now we have a ban on plastic bags. I mean, it's all these things that happen, not because of our politicians. That's one thing I'm learning. It happens because the people get behind them and push. They let their voices be heard. And that's so important. So if you're sitting there and you're thinking, there's nothing I can do, the most important thing you can do is stand up and do something. And if you feel that it's not your job to do something, well then if you have a child, a niece, a nephew, your own children, you're a grandmother, look at that child and ask yourself, if I don't do something, what is that future for that child going to be like? So each and every one of us will add up to 400,000, will add up to 400 million. And that's what's needed, folks. That's how change happens. And we still live in the United States of America. I mean, the last time I looked, I said, I still live in the USA. You know, I remember my grandmother. My grandmother was in this country. She came from Russia, Odessa, Russia. She came here, she could speak no English, and she worked in a factory sewing. And then she got married, had children, and in her heart, she always wanted to vote, but she couldn't. Why? She couldn't vote because she needed to learn the language. She needed to learn how to read. She couldn't vote because she had to become a citizen, so she had to learn what it took to become a citizen. And then the day came. The day came when my grandmother became a citizen. And the day came when she went to the polls. And I was a little girl. I was about, I would say I was about 12 years old at the time. And I walked her to the polls. And the whole family, we lived within about maybe 11 blocks of each other. The whole family went to the polls with Grandma. And she walked out of the polls and she put her arm around me and she says, Elaine, only in America can women vote. I never forgot that. So shame on you if you don't vote. Look at a person who comes from another country, who was only here such a short time, and she was so inspired to vote. She worked so hard to vote. And all of us who are enjoying the privilege of being a free country, being able to walk the streets freely, and being able to vote. You know, there are people across the globe that are dying trying to get the vote, and we have the vote. And particularly women, you need to vote. You need to get out there. We have some very important elections this year. Particularly for the city council, everybody complains how dysfunctional it is. Well, let's get some functional people in there. We have the 4th and 5th district supervisors running. Very important, the Board of Supervisors. I'm beginning to see more and more how important local elections are. Local elections determine our environment. They determine the jobs. They determine the schooling. All the things that happen in a county are determined by the Board of Supervisors. You have to go out. You have to make an intelligent vote. It is very, very important. But like I said, particularly women. So there's a lot to think about. And once again, you know, this is the anniversary of the shooting of Andy Lopez. I want to thank all the people who are working so hard to bring justice to this community. You know, there's no excuse in my mind, no excuse for taking a young life like that. No excuse at all. So there's lots to think about. And I want to thank my viewers and listeners for participating and for supporting Women's Spaces. I encourage you, please become a fan. I can't believe it. I have 323 fans now. I mean, Oprah Winfrey has over 2 million, but that's okay. I'm moving along. 323, that's pretty good. I like to see at least 500. So if you are so inclined and you're on the internet or on Facebook, go to Women's Spaces and become a fan. You can also see all the shows which are archived on www.womensspaces.com. I've got all the shows on there that I've done. And you know, one of the things, as I review my shows, what I find personally so wonderful about it, just like today's show, just 3 women having a conversation about climate change and the Climate Change March. And that's all it is, folks, is people talking to each other. And we need to talk to each other more. We need to talk to our friends. We need to talk to our spouses more. And above all, we need to talk to our children more. Anyway, lots to think about. This is Elaine B. Holtz, and you've been watching Women's Spaces. And I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for watching and listening. And I look forward to being together with you the next time.
Your life will do what you must do to comfort you and calm you down and let you rest now. The woman in your life, she can rest so easily. She knows everything you do because the woman in your life is you. The woman in your life knows simply what is true. She knows a simple way to touch to make you whole now. The woman in your life, she can touch so easily. She knows everything you do because the woman in your life is you. And who knows more about your story, about your struggles in the world? Who cares more to bless your weary shoulders than the woman in your life as she's trying to come through?